So, Kingdom Hearts 3 is a real thing now. You can go to a store and buy the game with money and put it in your console and play it. It is a game that officially exists in a physical, playable form. It may have taken half of grade school, all of middle and high school, 4 years of college, 30 different spin-offs, 2 whole console generations, YouTube becoming a shithole, 9 additional seasons of SpongeBob, and 57 Spider-Man reboots, but it's here. And all the jokes about the game never coming out can finally die peacefully. They're gonna be for the 4th game now. While other people are in the middle of making their hot takes and 12-hour-long analysis videos on the game, we're gonna be a bit more positive, just like this idiot. There may be quite a bit you can pick apart and make fun of with Kingdom Hearts, believe me, I do it pretty much all the time, but what the games do well, they do damn well. I love the series even if it is far from perfect, and I feel like in a way that's best represented with the boss fights in these games. Whether they stand out as strong narrative moments or just really fun fights, they're up there with some of my biggest personal highlights from this flawed yet endearing series of games. I do first of all want to clarify that I'm focusing strictly on the main story bosses. Pretty much anything that's mandatory to fight qualifies. I don't want to see anybody complaining when I exclude a data boss or a secret boss or the wet dream of a masochist kind of boss. I imagine there's at least one person out there that didn't pay attention to anything I just said and is probably gonna ask, where is Sephiroth or Lingering Will or Data whoever the fuck? I will wait patiently to find out who that one person in the comment section is. Hey, Dream Drop Distance, I like you and all, but your boss selection makes me want to attach jumper cables to my nipples. In other non-morbid words, the boss selection is not very good. At best, they're competent, but overall just bland. And at worst, they're repulsive, infuriating, incompetent, and badly executed at levels I've only seen rivaled by the Super Bowl halftime show. Though, to be fair, the game scored more wins with the boss selection than the Rams against the Patriots. For as few and far between as they are, the good boss fights from the game I actually really liked. It was kind of a hard toss-up between a select few, but there could only be one, so have Tron Guy. That one's pretty good. Can't say I expected a boss fight in one of the Disney worlds to actually carry a bit of emotional weight, let alone in the world based on that one Tron sequel that nobody remembers, but here we are. Sora became friends with Tron in KH2, but upon returning to the world again in 3D, or at least a dream version of the world, I don't know, this game is confusing. Tron, now going by Rinsler, got brainwashed by not Jeff Bridges, and now he's out for blood. A bunch of story shit happens, all the Tron characters look horribly out of place in the Kingdom Hearts universe, and then Sora and Rinsler get into the battle arena and the fight begins. Unlike a lot of other bosses from the franchise, Rinsler plays out a lot more down to earth. Nothing flashy or epic, just a small-scale one-on-one encounter. It's simple but effective for what mood it's trying to give off, on top of being a really fun and challenging boss. Pretty much all of Rinsler's attacks are physical or projectile-based. He's a quick boy, so best get accustomed to fast dodging and attacking because you're gonna need it. I feel like this is one of the few times the boss in this game found a good balance between challenging but fair. You have to be alert and keep your head in the game more often than most other fights, but it's nothing that's overly demanding and the battle goes by pretty seamlessly once you grow accustomed to that. Sometimes he flips the screen upside down, which can be a tad disorienting, but it's thankfully brief and he's always close to your vicinity, so you'll rarely, if ever, get fucked over by that. It's a tense encounter that pulls off the mood it's aiming for in a pretty effective manner. The soundtrack sets the tone perfectly, and you can tell what's going on through Tron's mind without so much as a facial expression or line of dialogue. It's all done strictly through character action, which I've gotta commend, especially with the bittersweet ending scene. Sure, claiming the title of Best Boss Battle in Dream Drop Distance might be as impressive as being the top player of Lawbreakers, but hey, credit where it's due. I've noticed that there's some pretty strong opinions toward KH3 going several different directions. Most people really enjoying the game, others being disappointed by it, and others complaining that you need to know the story of the previous games before 3 in the same day and age where one of the highest grossing films of all time requires you to watch a dozen other movies to know what's going on, where nobody seems to mind in that instance. Y'all just hate Donald Duck, don't ya? get some taste. But yeah, snark aside, I love the game, but if somebody wasn't satisfied with how it turned out, that's perfectly fine. It took over a decade to come out, it was gonna disappoint somebody. But can we at least agree that Mount Olympus was one banger of an opening level, and that the boss battle at the end was pretty awesome? I remember that a long time ago, fighting the Hydra with not Danny DeVito on your side was the hypest shit on the planet. That kinda got knocked down a peg after this game let you fight 3 Greek titans at the same time. The production values here are insane, rivaling a good number of final bosses I've fought, and it's one of the first bosses in the game. While there are a couple fights that precede this one, I'd say the Titans battle is the first proper test for what mechanics you've been taught and gotten accustomed to throughout the opening hours. Everything from the basic hack and slash fighting to the significantly less broken flow motion and the situation commands you will inevitably use on accident when you just want to talk to a Moogle. It's a lot to take in, but the game gets you accustomed to it all before this point, so the fight plays out pretty smoothly. The first phase is a more up-close encounter with both the lava and ice titans, while the second phase is a half-grounded, half-airborne fight against the wind titan. It's not too terribly difficult, again, early game, it's just really fun and puts you into wildly different scenarios to demonstrate what ways you can utilize the combat mechanics new and old. On top of showing off how much the franchise has managed to step up with 8th gen hardware. We've come a long way since the PS2 days. They added people in this game. It's funny looking back on Kingdom Hearts 1 after how much the series has grown and progressed ever since. For a story that's infamous for being more complicated and hard to follow than Calculus, or Yoko Taro's Mind, or Chris Brown's criminal record, it oddly enough starts on a note that's, for lack of a more appropriate description, simple and clean. It's mostly just Sora going to multiple different worlds to stop whatever the hell is going on and get his friends back, saving Kairi because she's worthless even when she gets Keyblade training, and Riku because he's an angsty 15-year-old which led to him getting possessed by Ansem. Or Xehanort. Or what's-his-face. Okay, why are like half the characters in this franchise the same 5 people? This leads to the final boss of your first visit to Hollow Bastion, where Sora has to knock some sense into Riku, because that's what friends do. The Riku Ansem fight does have a fair bit of infamy surrounding it, mostly because it's preluded by a lengthy cutscene that you're forced to rewatch every time you die and can't skip in the original version.
Forget it. There's no way you're taking Kairi's heart!
Yeah, the whole experience is basically this multiplied by 13. But hey, you shouldn't let that fault the boss itself because, independent of whatever crap precedes it, it's still a really good fight. A pretty neat little detail about this encounter is that Riku's method of attack is pretty identical to the sparring matches that he and Sora had around the beginning of the game. Only instead of wooden swords, they're fighting with magic and actual weapons. What I'm trying to say is that the intensity is kinda turned up a notch here. It's a nice callback to the beginning of the game when they're both just stupid kids living their lives. Unlike now when they're stupid kids fighting for the fate of everything. If we're talking just raw sword fighting, this battle is where you're tested the most on that front in the whole game. Riku is pretty alert and on his guard for most of the battle, making it heavily based around finding an opening to exploit an attack. Whether it be through stunning him with a successful block, or attacking him from the rear after he leaves himself vulnerable, it's all about attacking smart to outwit your opponent. It fits pretty well considering the competitive rivalry between both characters. As the battle goes on, Riku's attacks get all the more intense. He goes into a super form which starts off temporary but eventually becomes permanent around the end, and does some rapid dash where gliding is your best chance of avoiding damage. While it can be cheap at times, not helping that there's one particular attack that engulfs the entire arena which can go die in a forest fire, I still really enjoy fighting this boss for what it contributes both story and gameplay wise. I don't even care that I have to watch that cutscene over and over again. But seriously, thank fuck you can skip the cutscenes in later ports of the game. I remember in Birth by Sleep when Aqua was a strong, capable protagonist who was the one character of the trio who managed to keep everything from completely going to shit. Apparently Square Enix didn't though, because in Kingdom Hearts 3, they made her suck at everything. Every time she fights anything in this game, she gets her ass handed to her to the point where it's just kind of irritating. I mean, you're telling me that in gameplay she was able to wipe the floor with Vanitas, but the cutscene afterwards is just like, nope, you suck? Are you fucking serious? But, okay, while I am annoyed with how the game handled Aqua and seems to do whatever to move the plot along at the expense of her character, the boss fight against Anti-Aqua is actually pretty damn good when you divorce it from the writing. Scenario: Aqua, Riku, and Mickey are all in the Realm of Darkness, Aqua got Norded, and Sora shows up to save the day, making everybody that kept saying "you're not ready to enter the Realm of Darkness" look dumb. This battle just oozes with atmosphere and emotion. The dark setting, the music that's slow and somber while still fitting the pace of the boss, Aqua's dialogue in battle along with her physical deterioration, the presentation alone sells how dire and hopeless things have gotten for Aqua and how Sora's the last hope of saving her. Aqua mainly uses magic-based attacks, homing orbs, spiky shit, cloning herself, and closing Sora to tear him to ribbons, all the while walking around like an edgelord. It's a battle that does a lot to keep you on your toes. Aqua teleports around the arena pretty frequently, so the whole fight is centered around keeping yourself alert to where she is and what she's going to do. While Aqua is a quick fighter and her attacks can hurt a lot, I never found any of it to be cheap or unfair. As long as you move fast and, unlike me, don't suck at video games, you'll get through just fine. With this whole scenario being built up throughout a good majority of the game, the payoff was well worth it all, even if I would have preferred it happening sooner than it did personally. The battle was fun, and I'll admit that I do find the battle's aftermath to be pretty touching. It's nice to finally have Aqua escape from the Realm of Darkness, even if the game hates her for some reason. Going from Aqua sucking ass to Aqua kicking ass, let's jump into the franchise's prequel title, Birth by Sleep. This entry is gonna be on the game's true final boss. Probably goes without saying, but just to be safe, heavy spoilers, proceed cautiously, skip here if you don't want any of it ruined, okay? Okay, your master's dead, Ventus is basically a vegetable, and the main villain Xehanort has taken control of Terra's body. Aqua's the last hope for saving both her friends, and has to fight against the newly formed Terra Xehanort. With your target essentially being a fusion of two dudes, the attack pattern is sort of a combination of Xehanort's magic and Terra's beefed up physical attacks. It's a two-phase battle where both halves play out pretty differently from each other. Phase 1 is a fast-paced duel between Aqua and Terra. Essentially, it's the same as the final boss in Terra's story, attacking with Dark Volley, Dark Impulse, Meteors, and pretty much everything that Terra's able to do within gameplay. It's a good boss for both characters, but I chose Aqua's version because I just like playing as her more. Oh, and also because of the second phase of the fight. This time, Terra summons some heartless thing that's basically the same one that Ansem had during the first game's final boss. It even plays out in a similar fashion where he has to do all of the bitch work. He'll punch you, use some shockwave attack, and slam you harder than a critic watching an Adam Sandler flick. This fight is all a matter of focusing on Xehanort and invading his personal bubble while being wary of his guardian. If I had to pick one word to describe this boss as, it'd be foreboding. The whole battle gives off the aura that no matter what the outcome, nobody's getting out unscathed. The dark lighting and music convey just how hopeless and desperate things have become. Terra's still in there fighting to regain control of his body, as shown directly with the team attack that both he and Aqua do. By the end, the battle becomes less about Aqua succeeding and more about keeping a spark of hope alive in light of her failing. It ends off the game on a pretty big downer of a note, which I suppose is fitting for a game that exists for the sole purpose of ripping your heart out. That wasn't intentional wordplay, but I'm keeping it in because fuck you, I do what I want. It took ages for Roxas to really grow on me. It probably doesn't help that my first introduction to him was as some random doofus that you played as during the second game's 3-hour-long tutorial of an opening. So yeah, I didn't really care much about his story in KH2 until I watched that compilation of cutscenes from 35 days divided by 2, multiplied by 7, minus 25 squared, multiplied by 8 plus 63 in parentheses, plus 17x where x equals 45, all of which is divided by 13, which is then multiplied by 0. Okay, jokes about the title aside, the game did help me realize that Roxas is essentially the emotional core of both 2 and Days when you really get down to it. He's been through quite a bit and only really wants to be his own person. A character arc that comes to sort of a bittersweet conclusion in 2's final world when Sora has to fight him. With Roxas being Sora's nobody, it's pretty fitting that the boss is a one-on-one battle of equals between both characters. Roxas fights you with 2 Keyblades like when he fought Axel at the beginning of the game, And he ain't fucking around. His attacks cover a pretty good amount of space and can cut you to ribbons if you aren't prepared. Later on throughout the battle, he starts fighting with a bunch of light-based magic attacks. It's a fairly short battle, and I honestly do wish that it went on just a tad longer, but I could overlook that when everything else surrounding the fight is executed so damn well. It's quite the frantic fight where Roxas moves and attacks pretty rapidly, often getting you staggered and locked into a combo if you play like a stupid shit. At this point, you've had hours upon hours to become well versed in KH2's combat system, along with accumulating a plethora of new items and abilities to utilize in combat. Roxas may be a strong opponent, but you've got more than enough to at least be on equal ground against him. The whole fight plays out to the tune of Roxas's theme, which both fits the somber mood of the battle and feels appropriate as a conclusion for Roxas's character arc, on top of reflecting just how rough his life has been. Roxas has his face concealed the entire time, as if he has no face of his own to show while Sora exists, and the boss taking place within the dive to the heart drives home the battle being more of an internal conflict for both characters. I know it's easy, like, really easy to riff on and poke fun of the story in Kingdom Hearts, but this whole battle unironically works really well in the storytelling department. I just wish I could have experienced it sooner in vanilla KH2 instead of only getting a cutscene that just shrugged off the whole thing like it didn't even matter. I'm gonna be talking about Kingdom Hearts 3 here, in addition to one more segment sometime after this one, and both times it'll be on extremely late game bosses. Might go without saying, but just to be safe, heavy spoilers, be cautious, and if you do get spoiled, it's entirely your fault now. A good chunk of the Keyblade Graveyard is dedicated to a bunch of boss fights where you fight multiple guys at once. Going in, I did kinda dread this part at first because having to deal with all these guys at the same time seemed more stressful than fun. But surprisingly, I found myself enjoying each one of these bosses. Surprisingly, they're a lot easier to manage than their premise would make you believe, and the story moments that come along with them are legitimately pretty sweet. My favorite of all of them was the final confrontation between Ansem, Xemnas, and young Xehanort, a clash against the pedo creep who won't leave Riku alone, the dude who sports a zebra-striped trench coat, and the pathetic loser who got roasted by a talking toy. What a battle. And I suppose it's only appropriate to fight these guys together, with them being the main villains of their respective games. This battle is sort of a throwback to each main encounter that you had with all three villains in their previous games. They've got all the same attacks, Ansem having the power of darkness, a motif totally unheard of in this franchise, Xemnas having his lasers and hand beams that totally aren't just bootleg lightsabers, and young Xehanort having his whip sword doohickey. The premise alone sells it for me, having you take on all of the previous main antagonists from the past at once just before the final fight of this game. It's executed pretty well too. I mean, it'd have to be this high up on the list. While you do have 3 separate attack patterns to keep track of, it never becomes overwhelming to deal with. I mean, they all can still attack you regardless of which character you're focusing on, but it's never too frequent or out of left field. You can mainly just worry about the attacks from whom you're fighting, which is perfectly manageable. It's surprisingly pretty lenient, all things considered, and even if you die, you'll only have to deal with whoever's left standing as opposed to restarting the whole thing. It's a really fun battle that I feel strikes the best difficulty balance out of all the multi-opponent bosses, especially when all those previous bosses have moments that range from annoying as shit to easy as piss. It also concludes the conflict between the heroes and antagonists in a pretty wholesome manner, actually. They don't go down screaming or cursing your name or anything, they accept the fact that they lost while acknowledging that Sora, Riku, and Mickey are respectable opponents. With all the fighting that these characters did in previous games, it was nice to see it conclude on a note like this. I'll also admit that it's pretty cathartic to shank young Xehanort after his fight in Dream Drop Distance made me want to subject myself to the Iron Maiden. Petty of me? Absolutely, but nobody loves him and he has no friends, so that hardly matters anyways. Oh, Terra, your story in Birth by Sleep may have just been one stupid decision after another on your part, but we don't think any less of you for it. You may be a dumbass, but you're our dumbass, and we love you, no matter what. A lot of stuff in Birth by Sleep is there to set up how things go from oof to mega oof in games later on in the timeline, but I'd say the point where things start to get really bad is when Terra ends up having to fight his master, Ericus. I suppose you could call me a bit biased toward this battle, with it heavily resembling what you'd see in a Star Wars duel, which I'm admittedly a giant slut for, probably not helping that Ericus is voiced by Mark Hamill, but I wouldn't be talking about this fight if I didn't think it was damn good on its own merits. I know the whole light versus darkness motif in this battle isn't really all that out of the ordinary, but it's executed in a manner not seen very often from the series. Ericus is a light-based attacker, while Terra starts off the battle with the Dark Impulse command, essentially conveying through gameplay that darkness is taking Terra over as he tries to protect Ven, and his master tries to kill both of them. The battle's not about you defeating some bad guy or trying to rescue a friend. Okay, it is kinda that second one to an extent, but it's more about an apprentice being pitted against his master while a dark, sinister power starts to overtake him. The fight is a case where both characters are pretty equal in power, it's just that the powers they draw from are completely opposite each other. Ericus may be an old fart, but he's a pretty aggressive and swift attacker, which for Terra is basically kryptonite, with him being the least maneuverable of the player characters. Blocking is emphasized here because you'll have a tougher time with dodging and keeping your distance because of how much faster Ericus can move around than you. One would probably imagine he'd at least let up a bit against his own student, but I guess he's like that one teacher who still carries a paddle around, just with a giant key sword and the voice of old man Luke Skywalker. It feels like throughout the battle, Ericus' aggression gradually pushes Terra further and further toward darkness. Not even just through cutscenes, but in actual gameplay, because you're constantly driven to use Dark Impulse to get the upper hand in battle. Much like the other major bosses, this one plays into the themes of failure and loss that are prevalent throughout Birth by Sleep. Though here, it hits that little bit harder since it's Terra being duped into a fight when trying to protect his friend, and Ericus taking some unnecessarily drastic measures. By the time they realize the error of their ways, it's too late. Ericus gets struck down, and the last thing he saw were the eyes of a frightened boy whose master had failed him. Just one of the many ways this game destroys your soul. After 50 years of adding more and more to the story about some island doofus fighting bad guys alongside Donald Duck and Goofy, it all concludes, at least for now, with the final confrontation against Xehanort. You go to some new world called, something I'd probably butcher horribly if I said it out loud. All that I know is that the name is Latin for Stairway to Heaven, and it looks like the first level of Sonic Unleashed. The ensuing battle is made up of multiple different phases, which all do something unique to shake up the fight while taking you to several different scenarios and locations throughout the world. The first phase is against an armored Xehanort. Well, okay, 13 armored Xehanorts, but they all share the same health bar and you can attack whoever you please. They all carry the weapons held by every character that 3 decided were still on the bad guy's side at one point. Surprisingly, you've got a pretty expansive area in this phase, and it gives you more freedom as to how you decide to attack, whether it be on the ground, airborne, or running away to heal up because you're like me and bad at video games. It's pretty intense, especially when the fight just decides to become bootleg Independence Day. The next phase, or the next 3 phases depending on how you look at it, consist of fighting just one armored dude wearing a stupid goat helmet who frequently changes the location of the battle. It starts off with essentially a recreation of that chase scene from Doctor Strange where the whole city gets distorted, obviously proving they did include Marvel in this game. I mean, if you somehow forgot the Big Hero 6 world was a thing. After that, you're transported underwater, and this part's actually pretty good because they finally managed to not fuck up the swimming controls in a Kingdom Hearts game. The Goatman portion concludes in the air as the part of the city you're in gets destroyed. Not gonna lie, it's pretty fucking cool. Finally, it's you facing off against just regular basic Xehanort without the goat helmet. Starting off on a large balcony and then shifting sky high in plain view of Kingdom Hearts, you're drawn in closer, and unlike the previous phases, you don't have anything that give you an environmental advantage, so it's all down to using everything you've learned. All concluding with a fake-out death scene and a finishing blow. When you get down to it, this boss is pretty much giant set piece after giant set piece, but I mean that in a good way. The whole battle is a good balance of style and substance because on top of the whole affair just looking damn impressive, every phase drops you right into a different scenario, shaking up the actual method you use to attack Xehanort. It goes a long way in keeping this lengthy final boss interesting to the very end. It falls just short of being my top favorite, but it's a fun challenge and a great conclusion to the final chapter in the series. Oh, who am I kidding? This is a Disney property. As long as it makes money, it's never gonna die. We're almost finished, but before we get to number 1, here are my honorable mentions. Boss fights that I also really like, but they just missed the cut when ordering the video. Final Vanitas. Easily the best final boss of the 3 character stories in Birth by Sleep. Also, that final phase is fucking awesome. Xigbar. A pretty fun fight against an opponent that mainly attacks with gunfire. and it's one of the few times in the game where anti-form is actually useful. Groundshaker. It's like Shadow of the Colossus with a more intuitive control scheme and game feel. That's always nice. Pete in the Timeless River. I like how this fight utilizes every scenario you went through in this world to shake up a boss that you've already fought before. Chernabog. A pretty awesome surprise near the end of the game, and an instance where the flying controls don't make me want to stand in traffic. It's also pretty sweet that the boss theme is Night on Bald Mountain. The Hydra. It's pretty easy to joke about Phil here, but even that aside, the boss is an awesome fight to behold. Armored Ventus Nightmare. It's pretty easy, but a fun conclusion to Dream Drop Distance. Definitely helped to compensate for how bad Riku's previous bosses were. You know, for as much as I really enjoyed KH3, I feel like I'd still say that 2's my favorite game in the franchise. Probably weird of me to say with 3 taking up nearly half the slots on this list, but KH2 just clicks with me more in terms of combat and narrative, even with all the tweaks and improvements that 3 brought to the table. Also, Xemnas is one of the best boss fights ever designed for any video game ever made, and that's a hill I will die on. I'm pretty sure none of you saw this coming and I completely subverted your expectations. I mean, a good chunk of the fight consists of Xemnas tossing large multi-story buildings at you like it's nothing, so that would already give it the top spot no matter what. But being real, it was a bit of a hard toss-up between Xemnas and Xehanort since they're both really good bosses for similar reasons. Like Xehanort, this battle is pretty much a giant compilation of awesome set piece after awesome set piece. The scale got tipped more in Xemnas' favor, mostly because I just simply preferred the set pieces in his final boss over Xehanort's. Don't get me wrong, all the flying around and Doctor Strange building distortion is cool and all, but compared to tearing apart a giant nobody ship piece by piece from its engines to its power core, dodging giant buildings in the air to beat up a dude sitting in a chair whom I'm pretty sure Devil May Cry 5 took inspiration from for Urizen, and flying around to shoot the shit out of a giant dragon using stupidly powerful lasers, yeah, this satisfies my craving for absurd and over-the-top shit so much more. The whole fight just leaves me in awe with how big in scale it is. Kingdom Hearts is no stranger to large-scale bosses, but nothing in the series before or ever since has managed to rival this one just in pure spectacle. Of course, it's also really fun. I mean, you'd have to be a complete failure at life to make fighting a dragon not fun, but yeah, it's fun. The battle is pretty lengthy, but all the phases offer something new, and that alone keeps you going just to see what other crazy shit they came up with for the game's finale. It's all topped off by just you, Riku, and Xemnas inside the void, the latter sporting some pretty sweet zebra-striped pajamas. It gets pretty hectic with all the lasers and thorns flying around everywhere, but it keeps the adrenaline high from all the previous phases going until the very end. I feel like if they really wanted to, they could have easily capped off the franchise with this final boss. I mean, not anymore obviously, but at the time the game came out maybe. It's a great conclusion to 2's story, and you can tell they went all out with making one final challenge that no one's ever gonna forget. I don't know what the future holds for Kingdom Hearts, but as it stands, Xemnas is one of the best final bosses ever designed, and my pick for the best boss fight in the series. Can't wait to see if they top it in 30 years when they release Kingdom Hearts 4 on the PlayStation 8.